Nothing about the life of Diego Armando Maradona could ever be described as uneventful. Possibly the most sensationally talented, explosive, and unplayable individual the sport football has ever seen at his best, at the 1986 World Cup, El Diego reached a peak few thought possible, even of him. 8 years later, he was sent home from the 1994 World Cup in America in disgrace after testing positive for ephedrine doping, having celebrated a fantastic goal against Greece like a dog with rabies. These are the type of events that have coloured Maradona's life, one of triumph and tragedy, addiction and genius, ecstasy and despair. Since retirement from football, I think it would be reasonable to suggest that there have been more lows than highs for Maradona. He took his first managerial post within months of being sent home from the 1994 World Cup with Textil Mandiu, followed by Racing Club. Between them, both jobs would last less than 5 months, as Maradona's partying inhabited his ability to oversee the day-to-day coaching of an entire squad of players. In 1995, when his ban expired, Maradona returned to what he knew best, playing football, joining his former club Boca Juniors. However, El Diego's return would be as chaotic as ever. Maradona spent a season with Boca before announcing his retirement, only to mount an unsuccessful comeback in 1997. Curiously, ahead of his failed 1997 comeback, fresh out of rehab, El Diego hired disgraced Canadian sprinter and drug cheat Ben Johnson to coach him back to full fitness. Johnson once said of Maradona, "Don't ever cross him. He knows some serious people." In light of those comments, it's probably worth noting that Ben Johnson also trained Libyan dictator Colonel Gaddafi, but it was Maradona who was the student he didn't want to cross. We could go down the rabbit hole of the madness of Maradona's playing days, and his final years in particular, but the point of this segment is just to give you an idea of the backdrop behind Maradona's appointment as Argentina boss in October 2008. Maradona got the job after Alfio Basile resigned, bringing his third stint as manager of the Argentina national team to an end in the process. Basile's resignation came in the light of a 1-0 defeat to Chile in a World Cup qualifier, which left Argentina's hopes of qualifying for the World Cup automatically in some doubt. Former Vélez and Boca Juniors boss Carlos Bianchi looked to be the favourite to replace him, meanwhile Maradona's name was thrown into the hat, alongside the likes of Sergio Batista and Diego Simeone. It's often the case that in times of seeming crisis, former players with goodwill from the fans and press can be linked with jobs they aren't really qualified for. A quick look at the bookies' favourites to replace Gareth Southgate, himself a former England regular without much senior managerial experience, shows that Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard and Gary Neville are among the favourites for the job, despite having very little managerial experience. And even David Beckham, who has literally no managerial experience or interest in management it would seem, is priced at 33-1, shorter odds than the likes of Pep Guardiola, Maurizio Pochettino and Antonio Conte. As much as we in England are far from immune from a sentimental or nostalgic candidate to manage the national team, the FA tends to err on the side of caution when it comes to these things. Lest we forget, Brian Clough was deemed too outspoken to be handed the England job, Glenn Hoddle was axed despite doing a decent job because he said disabled people were being punished for sins committed in a previous life, and Sam Allardyce only managed one game in his dream job for the minor indiscretion of discussing how to get around FIFA and the FA's rules over third-party ownership whilst necking a pint of white wine. They would never appoint Paul Gascoigne, for example, which is probably the closest comparison one could make to Argentina handing the reins as national team boss over to Diego Armando Maradona. The Argentine Football Association, or AFA, aren't quite so fussy though, and much to the delight of the Argentine public, who adore Maradona, unlike almost anyone else, El Diego put pen to paper on a 2-year deal that would see him take charge of La Albiceleste at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. The logic of the AFA seemed to be that Argentina didn't need a tactical genius or a first-rate strategist. Their team was blessed with some of the finest talents in world football, yet they had underachieved at the last few World Cups. No, what Argentina needed was an inspirational figure who could come in and galvanise a talented group of players. A motivator, a figurehead, a cheerleader even. And what finer inspiration could there be than the man who is often described as having single-handedly dragged Argentina to glory at the 1986 World Cup? Maradona had been linked with the Argentina job in the past, but his health concerns were always deemed to be too severe. From 1983 to 2004, Maradona was addicted to cocaine, among other things. Following his retirement in 1997, he had become morbidly obese and a chronic alcoholic. Maradona almost died of a cocaine overdose in 2000, and he diced with death once again in 2004 when he suffered a major heart attack. In 2005, Maradona underwent gastric bypass surgery in Colombia, which managed to reduce him to a healthy weight for the first time in almost a decade. but in 2007 he was readmitted to hospital and treated for hepatitis and alcohol abuse, going back into rehab. By 2008 though, it was hoped that El Diego was going to take a walk on the mild side, putting his addiction behind him, cooling off from the partying and concentrating on what was best for Argentina's star-studded squad. The views of the AFA, and as much as the idea that they had a team with enormous potential that just needed unleashing was understandable, since this was a squad which could boast the likes of Javier Mascherano, Juan Roman Riquelme, Javier Zanetti, Sergio Aguero, Fernando Gago, Gabriel Heinze, Gabriel Milito, Carlos Tevez, Pablo Zabaleta, and the man that many people had labelled Maradona's heir apparent, Lionel Messi. In Maradona's first 2 games in charge, Argentina beat Scotland and France away from home in friendlies, but he would be judged on his results in World Cup qualifying. His first competitive game was a walkover, as Argentina met expectations of them in a dominant 4-0 rout of Venezuela. Already we were starting to get an idea of Maradona's attacking outlook, since little had been known of his managerial approach prior to his appointment, given his lack of experience. 4 forwards started for Argentina against Venezuela, and all 4 of them scored. Next up would be a trip to Bolivia, famed for their impressive home record and dreadful away record. Bolivia's home ground, the Estadio Hernández Siles, has an altitude of almost 12,000 feet above sea level, or 3,637 metres, and many opponents have claimed that the conditions give Bolivia a significant home advantage. FIFA actually banned Bolivia from playing their games at the ground in 2007, before reversing their decision, much to their qualifying opponents' disgust. One should note that on the 2 occasions in which Bolivia have hosted the Copa America, they'd reached the final, once winning the entire competition, despite never having done so on foreign soil. As impressive as Bolivia could be at home, they were enduring a wretched qualifying campaign, and they had recently been beaten 2-0 at home by Chile. Argentina were big favourites then, but following 3 wins from 3, Maradona was about to get his first taste of defeat in spectacular fashion. Argentina were thrashed 6-1, suffering their joint heaviest defeat of all time, equaling a record that went all the way back to a 6-1 defeat to Czechoslovakia at the 1958 World Cup. After that match, there was an inquest, and plenty of fingers were pointed towards the man at the top. The press were critical of Maradona's tactics and team selection, having made wholesale changes to his squad following success in those friendly games against Scotland and France. This will become a common theme of Maradona's international management, as he selected almost an entire fresh squad of players for every set of international fixtures. There were only 6 or 7 players who appeared to be guaranteed a spot in Maradona's squad, and even they couldn't bank on a starting berth. Within the space of just 2 years, Maradona called up an incredible 108 different players, including 100 in the space of less than 18 months prior to the 2010 World Cup. It's a turnover of players that is almost unheard of in international football, especially for an established footballing powerhouse like Argentina with several household names. All the chopping and changing meant it was impossible for players to build any real partnerships on the pitch or relationships in the dressing room. It would also have been impossible for Maradona to really implement his tactical ideas, except for the fact that he didn't really have any, so that wasn't actually too much of a problem. Argentina bounced back from defeat to Bolivia with a 1-0 win against Colombia, but then came 3 consecutive defeats to Ecuador, Brazil, and Paraguay, all of whom were stiff rivals for qualification. The defeat to Brazil, as it always will be for Argentines, was a particularly bitter one, as they were beaten 3-1 on home soil, as Maradona attempted to play a slightly more conservative 4-4-1-1. Those 3 results left Argentina in 5th place, outside of the automatic qualifying spots, within inches of missing out on even an Interconfederation playoff spot, and with Maradona at real risk of being the first Argentina manager to fail to qualify for the World Cup since 1970. Another tactical shift came ahead of Argentina's crunch game against Peru, as Maradona opted for a back 3 with Jonas Gutierrez and Emiliano Insua as the wingbacks, and Lionel Messi playing just off of Gonzalo Higuain. Substitute Martin Palermo would be the real hero though, in perhaps the most memorable game of Maradona's managerial reign, creating an iconic footballing photograph. Argentina had led from the 48th to the 89th minute before Peru equalised with only injury time remaining. In the final seconds of the game, Palermo managed to convert a miss-hit shot past Leo Bertrand, the Peru goalkeeper, giving Argentina hope and sending Maradona flying down the touchline with an unusual dive and slide celebration. Argentina's final game would be just as dramatic. Uruguay were the opponents, who were just 1 point behind Argentina, meanwhile Ecuador were just 2 points behind them. Only a win would absolutely guarantee automatic qualification, and it took until the 84th minute for another substitute, this time Mario Bellatti, to come up with the goods. It was the only goal that Belatti ever scored for Argentina, but he couldn't have come up with a much more important strike. Despite all the doubts, dubious selection decisions, and humiliating defeat, Maradona had taken Argentina to the World Cup, and he hadn't forgotten about some of the criticisms he had taken in the press. Magnanimous and statesmanly are not words in Maradona's vernacular, as he launched a tirade against Argentina's sports journalists in the post-match press conference, telling the male journalists who didn't believe in his team to suck it and keep on sucking it, as well as telling one specific journalist, something which I originally recorded but am now not going to say because I think it might get the video demonetized. Maradona was handed a 2-month ban from football by FIFA for his outbursts, meaning Argentina had to cancel one of their World Cup warm-up games, and his next public appearance would be just as controversial. The announcement of Maradona's squad was always likely to make for interesting viewing, as the notoriously fickle former great would have to pick his 23-man squad and then stick with it. Few expected him to leave out big names like Javier Zanetti and Esteban Cambiaso though, or to have grown a beard to cover a scar to his face that he had suffered after being bitten by his dog. But the real controversy came in the car park when El Diego ran over a cameraman's foot whilst trying to make his escape in his Mini before blasting the cameraman for his idiocy after leaving him in need of treatment from the paramedics and a trip to the hospital. Whilst others questioned the omissions from Maradona's squad, the man himself remained fiercely loyal to his players. "I've got my 23 players and I'm ready to die with them," he told journalists, and there was some truth to that. As outspoken as he was, Maradona almost never publicly criticised one of his own players. Even after that 6-1 defeat to Peru, he stood by the players he had picked, meanwhile his own antics often sheltered them from individual criticism. One man who was particularly surprised to have been called up was Colón defender Ariel Garce, who hadn't won a cap since 2002 when he made 2 appearances and had already booked his flights and hotel in South Africa to watch the team as a fan with his family. Maradona apparently included Garce in his squad after having a dream that Argentina won the World Cup, but with Garce's face being the only one he could remember from the celebrations. He didn't make a single appearance at the finals. Perhaps the biggest shock of all came when the 2010 World Cup actually began though, and Argentina looked pretty good. Maradona remained outspoken in press conferences, but his team was practically normal. Argentina played a 4-3-3 in each of their group stage games, beating Nigeria 1-0, South Korea 4-1 and Greece 2-0, despite fielding a slightly weakened team in that final group game. Maradona had always stood by his players in public, but he seemed to be gaining a real belief in them behind the scenes. Against Mexico in the round of 16, he decided to go even more attacking, sticking with the basic 4-3-3, but playing with only one holding midfielder, Javier Mascherano, with Maxi Rodriguez and Angel Di Maria either side of him. It worked a treat. Argentina were a threat all game, and they were 3-0 up before the hour mark in a game that finished 3-1. By this stage, Argentina might as well have won the World Cup as far as Maradona was concerned. He came out swinging in the press, essentially offering his sympathies to anyone unfortunate enough to stand in Albiceleste's way. Argentina's next opponents didn't take kindly to the taunts, and German midfielder Bastian Schweinsteiger accused the former World Cup winner of being disrespectful. Maradona responded by doing his best attempt at a mock German accent and accusing Schweinsteiger of being scared. Maradona's faith in his players was admirable, but he was perhaps underestimating the strength of their opponents. Germany had a very young squad in South Africa, but unlike Argentina, they had a very clearly defined identity and approach. Joachim Löw's 4-2-3-1 featuring prolific World Cup marksman Miroslav Klose and the trio of Thomas Muller, Lukas Podolski and Mesut Ozil in behind him had proved too much for England to handle, as Fabio Capello's side had fallen victim to Germany's quick and incisive counter-attacks, looking like conceding nearly every time Germany attacked. Maradona made no allowances for Germany's attacking prowess though, naming an unchanged 11 with Mascherano as his only holding midfielder and continuing to bench Juan Sebastian Veron in favour of Maxi Rodriguez and Angel Di Maria. Within minutes, Germany would take the lead via the head of Thomas Muller, but Argentina responded well, threatening through Messi and Higuain, but never landing a killer blow. In the 68th minute, a classic closer goal from close range left Argentina's World Cup dreams hanging by a thread. Maradona's response was all-out attack, with Javier Pastore and Sergio Aguero introduced from the bench, but it was no use. Germany toyed with Argentina before hitting them on the break, and in the end, the 4-0 result rather appeared to flatter Maradona's men, who had come into the game so high on confidence. It was humiliation for Maradona, and particularly satisfying for Germany, especially for Thomas Muller, who Maradona had called a ball boy in his press conference. Maradona told reporters after the defeat that he may resign tomorrow, but then came reports of a new 4-year deal that would keep Maradona on until the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. The AFA were willing to extend Maradona's contract, but they wanted to make changes to his backroom staff, and that was a no-go for El Diego. Inflexible, he insisted that there could be no changes to his coaching team, and in return, the AFA told him that no new contract would be forthcoming. Ultimately, the executive committee unanimously voted not to renew his contract, and the fact Maradona had refused to negotiate reportedly came as a relief to some committee members who felt he was far too volatile for the job. Maradona departed as he had arrived and as he had spent his entire life, in controversy. He claimed to have been betrayed and lied to as the AFA replaced him with Sergio Batista, who had been heavily linked with the job back in 2008. Maradona has since had 2 managerial stints in the United Arab Emirates, which he reportedly enjoyed due to the ban on paparazzi in the Gulf state, before taking a job with Dorados de Sinaloa in Mexico in 2018, where he spent 9 months narrowly missing out on promotion in a season documented by the Netflix documentary Maradona in Mexico. Maradona is now back in Argentina, managing Gimnasia de la Plata, which has been as chaotic as everything else that is touched by the self-proclaimed hand of God. Maradona resigned after just 2 months in the job before returning 2 days later. El Diego will always be too loco to make a top-class manager, one suspects, given that he is someone who has described himself as a drug addict who will always be a drug addict. Maradona is an imperfect human being, to put it mildly, but he is someone who has produced moments of unbridled genius and joy on a football pitch, and it is for that reason that he will forever be remembered, rather than anything he does as a coach. El Diego may consider himself an addict for life, but one hopes he can find some peace and ultimately good health, along with everyone else who faces such demons in life. Thank you to Argentine journalist and subscriber Santi Bowser for suggesting this video idea, and thank you all for watching. Please do give us a like if you enjoyed the video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and obviously do make sure that you're subscribed to HITC Sevens and have notifications turned on. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, where the username is just at HITC Sevens on both.